Welcome back to Mystery Files, and today is story number 4 of Hell Month. And I hope you're really enjoying it so far, and if you are, make sure to absolutely smash to smithereens that like button. We are trying to get at least 55, maybe 60 likes on this. I know y'all can do it. Now, remember to find the hidden clue and put what it is with the timestamp in the comments to be entered into the giveaway. Okay, so without any further ado, as of now, it's time to slip into a mind that's not our own. Let's go. On the afternoon of May 20th, 1967, a man stumbled out of the trees at Falcon Lake in Manitoba, Canada. He appeared drunk as he staggered along the road, eventually making his way to the Falcon Motor Hotel. And here, he was spotted by RCMP Constable Gio Salaki, who approached and asked him if he needed help. The man kind of just shrugged him off and said he was going to his room. He then walked to the reception desk where he told the manager that he actually needed a doctor. But he was informed that the local MD was not in town that day, so he just proceeded to go to his room. And from there, he made a call to his wife, telling her that he'd been involved in some sort of accident, but that he was okay and would be riding the Greyhound back to Winnipeg that afternoon. And he was met at the bus station by his son, who took him directly to the Mariscordia Healthcare Center. Here, medics took one look at his condition, and then they rushed him immediately into the emergency room. The man at the center of this odd incident was named Stefan Michalak, and he was 51 years old, and he was an industrial mechanic by trade. Now, Michalak's passion, though, was geology. He'd often spend his weekends at Falcon Lake, prospecting for quartz and silver that was plentiful in the area. And he'd staked a claim in the Falcon Lake area to prospect for precious metals. But this time, his prospecting efforts have gotten him into trouble, in a way. The doctor who examined him found severe burns on his chest and his stomach, presenting in a grid-like pattern. And Michalak was complaining of nausea and dizziness, and he was also hallucinating. And according to the story that he told hospital staff, he had incurred his injuries in an encounter with a UFO. The story Stefan Michalak told went something like this. He'd been out in the woods near Falcon Lake, chipping away at a quartz vein, wearing the welding goggles that he used to protect against flying rock chips. And at that moment, a noise from the lake startled him. And what it was is it was a bunch of geese honking loudly and then taking to the air, clearly disturbed by something. So Michalak went to check on the cause of this commotion, and that was when he spotted them. Not one, but two cigarette or cigar-shaped objects in the sky, giving off this intense scarlet glow. And the objects started descending towards the ground, keeping a consistent distance between them. Their movements were synchronized. One of them stopped and hovered, while the other one continued to descend. And it landed on a flat outcropping of rock, less than 100 yards from where Michalak was standing. And Michalak was so focused on this craft that he did not see its companion leave. But then when he diverted his gaze back into the sky, he realized that the other one was gone. And Stefan was a pragmatic guy, whereas someone more fanciful might have viewed this strange scene and immediately assumed alien craft. His initial impression was that this was some experimental airplane, probably under development by the United States. And he had assumed that it had landed due to mechanical failure, and that being the case, he thought he might be able to go over and help. So he started walking towards the craft, noticing as he did that it was not a cylinder as he first thought, but it was a disc, a classic flying saucer. And this exterior of it was some smooth metal devoid of any visible joints. Where previously it had glowed red, it faded now to a stainless steel sheen. And Michalak noticed something else. There was a diamond-shaped opening about 2 feet by 3 feet standing open on the side of the craft. And he was thinking that this must be a hatch for entering and exiting the vehicle. Michalak got closer now. He could feel the warm air wafting out of the craft. He could smell the tart whiff of sulfur. Somewhere a motor whirled, but it was low and the buzz was like electrical in character. And Michalak kind of scanned and looked at the hull for identifying decals. I mean, he was expecting to see the insignia of NASA or perhaps maybe the United States Air Force, but there was none. Michalak was 70 feet away, now 60 feet, and the craft sat shrouded in this bright purple light now. He got these little spots in his eyes just looking at it, and now he heard something. Voices. To Michalak's ears, the voices sounded human, one with a higher pitch than the other. However, he could not make out what they were saying, so he went closer. At this point, he's about 10 feet away when he called out, "Hey, you Yankee boys, you having trouble? Come on out and let's see what we can do about it." No reply came from within. He then repeated the question in his native Polish language, then in Russian, then in German. Nothing responded. And he was close now, close enough to peer into the opening hatch. The interior was awash with light, laser-like beams crisscrossing the cabin. Other lights were flashing in seemingly random sequences. What he didn't see, though, was any sign of life at all. What was this thing? This extraordinary craft that seemed technologically way more advanced than anything Michalak was aware of or had ever seen. He reached out to touch it and immediately withdrew his hand. The surface was so hot that the tips of his gloves melted. Then, without warning, something must have triggered the craft when he touched it, because the craft turned counterclockwise, revealing a panel with a grid pattern of circular holes. This emitted a blast of heated gas that seared his chest, throwing him backward. And Michalak felt this scorching pain, and his shirt was on fire, so he tore it off. And ripping it off, he also removed his undershirt. The craft was rising now. Already, it was at the level of the treetops. Then, in a flash, it was gone, just like its sister ship. And Michalak lay on the ground, enveloped by nausea, his head throbbing, pain assailing the seared flesh of his chest. So he pulled himself to his knees, then got to his feet and stood for a moment, bent over, dry heaving just before ejecting his breakfast right into the dirt. And he felt weak, unsteady, and barely able to walk on his feet. So he went to go retrieve his jacket, and he pulled it over his naked torso. Then he staggered off into the direction of town. There were many times during that arduous walk that Michalak thought he might not make it. He might die. And dots danced before his vision, and the feeling of nausea never left him. The mother of all headaches just pounded in his skull, and several times he had to stop and throw up. It was just by sheer force of will that got him to the motel, onto the Greyhound, and then to Winnipeg. Now, here he lay in the hospital bed, telling his story to a doctor who probably thought he'd lost his marbles somewhere out in the woods. But Michalak did not remain long in the hospital. He was discharged within 24 hours. Then the following day, he made the fateful decision to tell his story to the Winnipeg Tribune, where it appeared under the headline, "I was burned by a UFO." And the accompanying photograph showed Michalak with his pajama top unbuttoned and the grid pattern of burns visible across his abdomen. That picture and the article that accompanied it would unleash a firestorm. Suddenly, everybody wanted a piece of Michalak. He was inundated with requests for interviews. Reporters were crowded outside his door. He received harassing phone calls from members of the public. His 9-year-old son was even bullied at school. And all the while, Michalak was struggling with his health. He suffered bouts of stomach pain, these severe headaches, and occasional blackouts. His weight plummeted, dropping by almost 15 pounds. Eventually, he admitted himself to the Mayo Clinic, where tests revealed that his lymphocyte count was dangerously low. This was believed to have been caused by radiation poisoning, although later tests were negative. And of course, there was interest from the authorities. Michalak was interviewed by the RCMP, officials at the Royal Canadian Air Force, and representatives of other government agencies. And the conclusion of these bodies was that he was either mistaken or that he had made the whole thing up. One rather patronizing suggestion was that Michalak had fallen and burned himself on a barbecue grill while drunk, and that he'd made up this whole UFO story to hide his embarrassment. And while the official line was that Michalak was lying, the response by the authorities did not suggest that they disbelieved him. Men and resources poured into this area to search for evidence. These included representatives of the RCMP, the Department of Health, the Department of National Defense, and the Royal Canadian Air Force. Not to mention, there was an American contingent too, with teams from the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization and the United States Air Force. Michalak was asked to help in the initial search effort, but was unable to do so because of his health. And residents of Falcon Lake remember the frantic days of the search as well. The roar of helicopters seemed like a constant din overhead as Army and Air Force choppers just scoured the lake shore from the sky. Meanwhile, soldiers and police officers walked grid searches through the woods hunting for evidence of this UFO. Then, on the second day of the search, 2 RCMP officers knocked on the door to Michalak's residence and asked Stefan to accompany them back to the lake. And Stefan was still weak from all this ordeal, confined to bed by his doctor, but nonetheless, he actually agreed to go. So he was taken up in this Army helicopter, but the view from the air kind of disoriented him, and he was unable to point out the UFO landing site. And then he didn't do much better on the ground either. But that evening there was a meeting at the Falcon Motor Hotel attended by what one employee called a bunch of official-looking folks. And he asked one of the men where they were from, and the man said that he was from NASA. The following day, the sky was filled with helicopters again, and this was the day that their efforts would be rewarded. The supposed landing site, the spot where Michalak claimed the UFO came to Earth, was marked by his burned glove, by the scorched shirt and the undershirt that he discarded there. But these were not the only clues the searchers found. And this spot was a perfect circle, 15 feet in diameter, in which all of the vegetation was scorched. Geiger meters indicated a high level of radioactivity within that circle. And then there was the metal, apparently superheated to a plasma to then seep down into the cracks of the rocks and solidified there. What could have caused this extreme heat, this radioactivity in this perfect circle of burned vegetation? If you believe Michalak, then it was some strange craft that came down to Earth on that very spot. The Falcon Lake incident has been cited as Canada's best documented UFO case and the world's most documented sighting of a UFO. But now, at that very moment, Mystery Files visited Falcon Lake, and he spoke to officials and said, guys, come on, now, radioactivity, the perfect circle, burned vegetation, why can't y'all just admit this was a UFO? And that's when I said, you know, I'm gonna do a story on this like 55 years later, and do you guys want to be remembered as liars or the truth tellers that for once told the truth? They said, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing here to see. And I said, okay, 55 years from now, if you're still alive, check out Mystery Files channel on YouTube and make sure to subscribe and hit that like button while I expose your lies. They scratched their heads as I disintegrated back to my time. I mean, this incident, it is certainly one of the most difficult to debunk. Yet, as with any UFO incident, there are debunkers aplenty. Most lean into the idea that Michalak was drunk and either hallucinated or just made up the whole incident. Some have suggested that he invented the story to keep competitors away from his prospecting site. Yeah, if that was the case, he failed dismally because sightseers flocked into that area to see the spot where the UFO had landed. Another theory addressed the burns on Michalak's body, and it suggested that these were not burns at all, but it was an allergic reaction to something he came into contact with, maybe poison oak. To me, that just sounds ridiculous. I mean, you can decide for yourself if any of these explanations suffice. The truth is that Stefan Michalak never claimed that he encountered a UFO in the woods on that day. And until his dying day in 1999 at the age of 83, he always maintained that it was an experimental military aircraft, probably American, possibly Soviet. And as for the official version, it still insists that this was a hoax perpetrated by Michalak for some unknown purpose. Even the greatest UFO skeptic will find that difficult to swallow. And to quote Stefan's son, Stan, if Dad hoaxed this, remember, we're talking about a blue-collar industrial mechanic. If he hoaxed this, then he was a freaking genius. And I agree with the son. I mean, what did he receive out of this? If it was some elaborate hoax, bad health? Something isn't adding up. But like always, I'll leave it up to you, the viewers, to decide if Stefan was telling the truth. Let me know your thoughts right now in the comments. Let's get this up to at least 55 likes, maybe 60 if you're feeling frisky. Seriously though, I hope you guys are enjoying Hellmonth so far, but that's all I have for you today. I'll see you on Friday. Cheers.